Frantz Fanon wrote a book so dangerous that France banned it the same day it published. While dying of leukemia in 1961, this black psychiatrist created something that turned college students into revolutionaries, got smuggled across borders and hollowed out Bibles, and made the CIA put him on a watch list. He raced against death to finish one final message to the colonized world. Your chains are in your mind. Violence will set you free, and your oppressors are more terrified of you than you've ever been of them. 3 months later, he was dead. His book is still igniting revolutions. What made one man's ideas worth killing? Fanon told colonized people worldwide that their mental enslavement mattered more than their physical chains, and that force against oppressors wasn't just justified, it was psychologically necessary for liberation. Steve Biko built South Africa's Black consciousness movement on his theories. Palestinian fighters and liberation movements from Bolivia to Ghana still quote his manifesto like scripture. They couldn't kill his ideas, and by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why empires still fear a dead man's words. But to understand why those words detonated across the world, you need to see where the explosion started. July 1925, Fort-de-France, Martinique. Frantz Fanon was born into a middle-class black family on a Caribbean island that looked like paradise, but functioned as a psychological prison. His parents scraped together money to send him to Lycée Victor Schellcher, the island's elite school. But what happened in those classrooms was calculated violence. Every morning, black children stood and recited "Our ancestors, the Gauls," memorizing French kings and European battles, while their actual ancestors lay in unmarked graves on sugar plantations. When young Fanon spoke Creole French, teachers scolded him for not using proper French. Speak Creole? Primitive. Mention African history? Ignorant. Only French mattered. French language, French heroes, French culture. One teacher refused to participate in this erasure. Aimé Césaire had just created the Negritude movement, teaching that black identity was power, not shame. He planted seeds in Fanon's mind about pride and resistance, but seeds need fire to grow. 1940, Vichy fascists seized control of Martinique after France fell to Hitler. Suddenly, French racism wasn't polite anymore. It became official policy. Fanon, 15 years old, watched the mask slip off. The civilized colonizers revealed themselves as brutal oppressors who had always been there, just hidden behind promises of equality. Fanon was 15 when he watched French civilization reveal its true face. 2 years later, he volunteered to die for it. At 17, Frantz Fanon joined the Free French Army in 1943, believing he was fighting for liberty and human dignity. He fought in the forests of Alsace, took shrapnel near Montbéliard, earned the Croix de Guerre for courage under fire. French officers pinned medals on his chest, then barred him from their mess halls because of his skin color. When Germany finally surrendered, Charles de Gaulle ordered every black soldier removed from formations entering German territory. France's victory parade couldn't have black faces visible in the photographs. The men who bled for France had to watch from the sidelines as white soldiers took credit for their sacrifice. Fanon wrote his brother Joby from Europe, "I've been deceived, and I am paying for my mistakes. I'm sick of it all." That letter marked the death of one Frantz Fanon and the birth of another, a man who would spend his life diagnosing and destroying the psychological machinery of white supremacy. Before we continue with how Fanon transformed his rage into the most feared revolutionary text of the 20th century, if you believe these stories of black intellectuals who terrified empires need to be heard, subscribe to Black Stories Untold. We're exposing the thinkers they tried to silence and the truths they spent millions covering up. Now, back to the video. 1947. Fanon entered medical school at the University of Lyon to study psychiatry. In Lyon's hospitals, he treated North African immigrant workers, Algerian men suffering psychological breakdowns that French doctors diagnosed as proof of racial inferiority. Colonial psychiatrist Antoine Perrault published papers claiming Algerians had underdeveloped frontal lobes and were mentally primitive, medical degrees used to justify oppression. Fanon recognized what others refused to see. These men suffered from the trauma of racism itself. Society was sick, but doctors blamed the victims. He wrote his doctoral thesis laying out exactly how colonialism manufactured mental illness, how white supremacy functioned as psychological warfare. His committee rejected it as too radical. So in 1952, Fanon published Black Skin, White Masks himself. The book exposed colonialism's deepest weapon, forcing black people to see themselves through white eyes. Split between two identities, never fully either one. Fanon watched it happen every day in his clinic. Black men staring in mirrors and seeing monsters. Algerian women scrubbing their skin raw, trying to lighten it. Patients who'd abandoned their birth names, their mother tongues, their entire identities, all for a chance at being treated human. But Fanon went further. He argued that liberation required recognizing this psychological split and refusing to perform for white approval anymore. Political revolution had to begin with mental decolonization, reclaiming the right to define yourself on your own terms. In Caribbean villages, people passed copies hidden in Bible covers. In African townships, students gathered in secret to read passages aloud. Why? Because Fanon said what no one else dared. The hate you feel when you look in the mirror, that's not yours. It was planted there. You're not sick. The system is sick. And you don't need anyone's permission to be free. That book exposed colonialism's playbook. But Fanon wasn't satisfied just writing about the disease. In 1953, he walked straight into its heart. November 1953. Frantz Fanon arrived in Algeria as head psychiatrist at Blida-Joinville Psychiatric Hospital. The moment he stepped off the boat, he entered a nightmare. French colonists lived in stone houses with electricity and running water. Algerians lived in what Fanon described as a town on its knees, wallowing in mire. No lights, no infrastructure, systematic starvation. At Blida-Joinville, Fanon revolutionized psychiatric treatment. He created cafe meetings where Algerian patients discussed their lives in Arabic instead of French. He established workshops for basket weaving and pottery, organized Muslim and Christian religious celebrations, started a patient-run newspaper. He was reconnecting people to their culture instead of forcing them to assimilate into French normalcy. But his patient roster revealed the true horror. French soldiers who brutalized Algerians during interrogations came to him with nightmares and psychological breakdowns. Algerian victims arrived unable to speak, unable to stop screaming. One French policeman sought treatment because torture had made him violent at home. He was battering his wife and children. The man didn't want to stop brutalizing Algerians. He wanted relief from the psychological cost so he could continue with a clear conscience. Fanon stared at an impossible truth. You cannot heal individuals in a society built on violence. November 1954. The FLN, or the National Liberation Front, launched coordinated attacks across Algeria, declaring war on French colonial rule. Frantz Fanon immediately chose a side. His hospital became a secret sanctuary. He treated wounded FLN fighters, hid weapons, provided medical cover for revolutionaries. By 1956, this impossible double life was destroying him. He was a French government employee, helping France massacre the people he was secretly protecting. On November 1956, he wrote his resignation letter. There comes a time when silence becomes dishonesty. France expelled him in January 1957, giving him 48 hours to leave Algeria. Fanon went underground instead. He surfaced in Tunis, joined the FLN openly as editor of their newspaper, El Mujahid, and became the intellectual voice of Algerian liberation. France thought expelling him would end the threat. Instead, within months, Fanon had become Africa's most dangerous diplomat. As FLN ambassador to Ghana, Frantz Fanon traveled across Africa, meeting revolutionary leaders. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Patrice Lumumba in Congo, Felix Mumi in Cameroon. At the 1958 All-African People's Congress in Accra, he advocated passionately for the African Legion, a continent-wide armed force that could coordinate liberation struggles from Algeria to South Africa. European powers understood the threat. One unified Africa, sharing weapons, tactics, and revolutionary consciousness, could dismantle the entire colonial project. Fanon was the architect connecting these movements. French intelligence sent assassins. Near the Algeria-Tunisia border, a landmine detonated under Fanon's car. 12 vertebrae fractured. He survived, barely. More assassination attempts followed. His body was breaking, but he kept traveling, kept writing, kept building networks of resistance. Then in December 1960, doctors diagnosed leukemia, months to live. Fanon's response? Race death itself, by dictating the most dangerous book ever written about colonialism. March through May 1961, Frantz Fanon lay in a Tunis hospital bed, dying, while his wife Josie sat beside him with pen and paper. For 3 months, through waves of pain, he dictated The Wretched of the Earth. Josie wrote frantically, capturing every word before the disease could silence him forever. The book opened with a declaration that made governments ban it immediately. Decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. Fanon explained that colonialism was born through force and maintained through force. Therefore, only force could destroy it. The colonizer spoke only one language: force. His most controversial argument came next. Violence had therapeutic value for the colonized. Fighting back didn't just win political freedom, it restored psychological humanity. Violence is a cleansing force that frees the native from his inferiority complex and restores his self-respect. The oppressed needed to fight not for revenge, but for rebirth. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote a preface that turned controversial into explosive. He told white European readers, to shoot down a European is to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, to destroy an oppressor and the man he oppresses at the same time. France banned the book the day it published. They smuggled it anyway, in hollowed books, in suitcases with false bottoms, passed hand to hand across Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and into American ghettos where the Black Panther Party would make it required reading. Frantz Fanon's leukemia accelerated. He flew to Rome for one final meeting with Sartre, then accepted a CIA offer for treatment in the United States. He traveled under the name Ibrahim Omar Fanon. What happened next remains disputed. By the time Fanon received proper treatment at a Maryland hospital, it was too late. Double pneumonia set in. Some historians argue bureaucratic delays killed him. Others suggest the CIA calculated that a dead Fanon posed less threat than a living revolutionary icon who might survive to inspire more uprisings. December 6, 1961. Frantz Fanon died at 36, 7 months before Algeria won independence. He never walked free streets in a liberated Algiers, but his words were already spreading like a virus through every colonized nation on Earth. The Black Panther Party made The Wretched of the Earth required reading for all members. Bobby Seale handed Huey Newton a copy at one of their first meetings. Frantz Fanon's analysis of police as occupying forces became the intellectual foundation of their 10-point program. When Panthers organized armed patrols monitoring police in Oakland, they were applying Fanon's theory that colonized people must meet violence with organized counter-violence. In South Africa, Steve Biko used Fanon's psychology of liberation to create the Black consciousness movement. Biko taught that before you fight apartheid in the streets, you must kill it in your mind. Pure Fanon. Palestinian resistance movements treated his analysis of settler colonialism as a strategic manual. From Bolivia to Iran to Sri Lanka, liberation fighters discovered that Fanon had diagnosed their reality decades before they lived it. France still struggles with Fanon because he forces them to confront the torture, the massacres, the psychological warfare they disguised as civilization. American institutions fear him because his colonial analysis maps directly onto police brutality and systemic racism. When Ferguson erupted in 2014, protesters carried signs quoting a man who died in 1961. Critics argue universities sanitize Fanon, teach him as historical curiosity instead of living critique, strip away the call to arms that made him dangerous. But read him in prisons, at protests, in occupied territories, and his words still explode. The conditions he described haven't vanished. They've just rebranded. Frantz Fanon never commanded troops or held office. He weaponized consciousness instead. Empires killed him at 36, but killing the man didn't kill the ideas. Every banned book spawned 1,000 smuggled copies. Every attempt to erase him carved his words deeper into history. His family paid the price. Josie Fanon carried his legacy through Algeria's messy independence, battled depression and alcoholism for 28 years, then died by self-destruction in 1989. But their children keep his foundation alive. Daughter Mireille runs the Frantz Fanon Foundation. Son Olivier leads the Frantz Fanon National Association. Fanon taught one lesson that still terrifies power. You don't need permission to be human. You don't need approval to be free. You have every right to take back what was stolen. And if they won't surrender it peacefully, take it by force. The most dangerous Black philosopher who ever lived Dangerous because he loved oppressed people enough to tell them the truth. That truth still detonates in minds worldwide, teaching that liberation begins when you stop asking and start taking. If this story opened your eyes to the intellectual they tried to erase, subscribe to Black Stories Untold. Like this video, share it, and comment which dangerous truth teller we should cover next. Because they can kill the revolutionary, but they can't kill the revolution.